this video, I'm going to give you a complete introduction to Adobe Illustrator. I'm going to talk about the basics of what Adobe Illustrator is. You know, that's a vector-based program application. I'm going to talk about what that means, and then I'm going to talk about how to open files and then how to manipulate lines and draw all sorts of objects. And so let's go ahead and get started. So Adobe Illustrator is what's called a vector-based application, or a vector-based graphics editing software. What that means is it modifies vectors, and that's in the mathematical sense. So first, let's compare the typical program that you might be used to working with, which is a pixel editing or a raster editing software. So one software that maybe you're not fully aware of, but is very commonly used is Photoshop. This is an example of a Photoshop illustration. Another program that you probably are aware of is Paint. So let me open up Paint here. This is also a raster editing software. Okay, so let's go back to Photoshop so I can show you what the difference is. So this may look like some lines here, but if you really zoom in on and magnify these lines, you'll find that these lines are not, well, they're not exactly straight. Okay, and they are kind of jagged if you zoom in really close, and what it is represented by pixels. That's because this whole image, though it looks like it has straight fine lines, it's all represented in pixels. Now, a raster editing software like Photoshop modifies those pixels. If I go over here and I select a line, it begins as if it's kind of a vector, and then when I place it, it will place pixels so that it matches a line. So what it does is it rasterizes that vector that I just drew it. So that's a raster editing software, just like Paint is. Paint is kind of like one of the first raster editing software. But Adobe Illustrator is something completely different. It's a vector editing software. So let me create a new file and show you. First, I'll explain this whole process, but let me just jump in and then we'll go back to how you create a new file. But I just want to explain the basics so that you know kind of what Adobe Illustrator is. So if I were to draw a line in Adobe Illustrator, let's put this as a no fill. Again, I'm going to show you all those details later, but if I were to draw this line, notice that this line is not pixelated like it was in Photoshop. If I zoom in to this line, it doesn't matter how close I get, it's always a perfect line. And that's because it's a vector. It's not represented in pixels. Yeah, okay, it has to convert it to pixels so you can see it on the monitor, but that pixel representation will always update itself even when you're magnified. Okay, now it will be rasterized or converted to an image or a raster image, like with pixels, once you've exported as an image file. But there's a big difference here. So here, all the files are represented in code. If you were to open up this raw file, you would see lines of code. Actually, you'd see gibberish because the code is proprietary, but all this information in this document is stored as properties of this line. Now, this is different than Photoshop. Photoshop, all the information is contained in each pixel. So if you have a 4K image, you have 4,000 pixels. And each one of those pixels have a red, green, and blue value, and actually an alpha value. Alpha is the how opaque or transparent that pixel is. And that contains all the information in the file. Illustrator, you could have 1,000 or 1,000,000 objects stored in this one document. So that's the difference between a raster and a vector editing software. Okay, so that's the broad differences. So why would you want to use Adobe Illustrator versus, say, a raster editing software? Well, with a raster editing software, it's perfect and wonderful for modifying images. Like if you have a photograph of you, or if you have maybe a confocal image, where you're looking at, the red, green, and blue channels, then it's perfect. Then Photoshop is perfect for that. But it's not as good at drawing like shapes and squares. Like if you notice when I drew that line, it wasn't a perfect line. If I now want to change the thickness of that line, I can't change the thickness of the line. I'd have to redraw the line, and that's not very convenient. However, in Adobe Illustrator, even though I placed this line a long time ago, I could go back here and I can modify the line. I can move it around, I can change its angle, its direction, I can do all sorts of things. So Adobe Illustrator has the editability of different graphics in it for infinitely a long time. Photoshop, on the other hand, you can modify those graphics, but you have to use the erasing, you have to, try to delete the object and redraw it and all that sort of thing, which works perfect for images, but not so great for if you're drawing graphics, like vector-based graphics. So that's kind of the difference. Now, one application is not better than the other. It's just one's more suited for drawing graphics. Okay, so let's go back to the start. No, I don't want to save this. Okay. So this is the open screen, and you have several options to pick for doing an artwork. So you have all these presets here. I don't like any of these presets. I usually go to the more presets, and you can see up on top of here you have web, you have print, you have film and video, you have art and illustration. And if I'm doing a printed object, like if I'm printing on a piece of paper or a poster board, then I'll go over here to print. And you'll see that it has, like shapes in the image here. And then you can go over here to, I don't do it in points. And the reason, everybody would recommend, do it in points, but points don't mean anything to me. Okay, if you ask me what the width of how many points wide a piece of paper is, I couldn't tell you. Now, what does it mean? Points are the smallest dot that a printer can make on a printer. So it has a tangible value, but that tangible value means nothing to me. So, and it probably means nothing to you either. So, so using points is irrelevant if you're trying to do like a piece of paper. So I usually use inches, or I'll use feet. Or no, not feet. I wouldn't use feet. I'd use inches, or I'll use centimeters. Okay. I don't think in them. Even though I'm a scientist, I still don't quite think 100% in the metric system. Probably should, but I don't. And so if I'm making a piece of paper, I usually do inches, or a poster, I'll do inches as well. Now this is 8.5 by 11. For if you're doing a research article, or you can delete this and type in, I think it's 62 by 48 width, I believe. Don't hold me to that. That would be the number of, that would be like a poster. But let's just do 8.5 by 11. Okay. And then if you're doing a printed object, I recommend doing CMYK color. The other presets don't really matter in my mind, but I recommend CMYK. What is CMYK? That is actually the color spectrum of a printed object. So you have multiple color schemes. You can kind of think of them as different languages. Some languages have words that are not found in other languages, and so similar to color palettes. Some colors are present in like the RGB color palette that may not be able to be represented in the CMYK color palette. You kind of want to choose the right color palette. If you're creating artwork that's going to be displayed on a screen, like a TV screen or a computer screen, and it will only be displayed that way, then go with RGB. If you're going to be printing it out, go with CMYK. What is CMYK? Well, that's cyan, magenta, yellow, black. Okay, so it's how many of these different colors are represented. Now, would it be the worst thing in the world if you print something off that's in RGB? It's not the worst thing in the world. What happens is they'll take that other RGB color and they'll kind of translate it into the CMYK color spectrum. So if you make something in RGB, send it to the printer, it will print that object. It converts it to CMYK at the printer. But not all the colors will be represented. So you might see slight discoloration, but it won't be huge. So it's not the worst thing that has ever happened. And if you want to create it like this, you create a piece of paper, just click create, and you're good. Now, if you want to create something for like a PowerPoint or something that goes on the web, I recommend going over here to the web and switch over to Pixels, and they'll have presets here. So you have 1920 by 1080. That is a PowerPoint slide. It used to be 1024 by 768 right over here. That used to be what they called high definition. That's 700p, but now it's 1080p is the new default for PowerPoint. So if you want to create PowerPoint slides, that's the way to go. So let's just go back to print and change this from points to inches and click create. Okay, so let me put this back to kind of where you probably have it. Basic. And let's hold off on this. Well, you know what? Let's delete this. I'm gonna get it back to probably how you see it. Okay. So this is probably what it looks like for you. It may not. You may have already started modifying things, and that's okay. But you probably have one column over here to the right, nothing over to the left, nothing on the top. Okay, so let's start modifying our workspace. Okay, first thing I want you to do is I want you to go up to Window. I want you to click Control. That brings down the control bar. You really want to have this always viewing, because a lot of very handy tools pop up, and we're going to talk about those later on in the video. Next thing I want is this gives you the over on here on the left, it gives you the very basic tools. And they're wonderful. They'll probably do almost everything you need. And if, let's say you have a line here, if you click and hold, you can draw all sorts of other objects. And if you want to add things here, you click this little 3 dots and you can add some of these different tools over to this toolbar. But I like to take the shortcut, go up to Window, Toolbars, and then go to Advanced. Now you have 2 rows here, and this is what you need. Again, you can still click and hold and then select different options here. But you now have more options to pick from. Now we want to populate the right-hand side for the additional tools that you really will need and you will be going to a lot. So I recommend adding that there. So we're going to go up to Window and we're going to start adding those. First thing I want to do is I want to add color. Okay, so let's drag this over until you see that vertical blue line, and it'll pop up like this. I want to click it over like this. Now you may not have all these options here, but I'm going to make sure you get them, so don't worry about that. So let's move to the next one, Window, and if you don't see Color Guide here, go down here to Color Guide and click it, and then drag it just below this object. Okay, so let's keep going. The next thing I want is Gradient. Gradient is very useful. I highly recommend you add it. So click it over there. And again, I just clicked this little double arrow to move it over. I don't see the need of adding it like this. I think it's just too much to view at the same time. So I just click it over here. Okay, let's go to Window. Let's go down to Pathfinder. And then we're going to move that over here. Looks good. Go up to Window, and let's go down to Properties. Where's Properties? Properties. And drag that over there. Okay, I may be forgetting one thing. I'm not 100% sure. Actually, I have a video on this, on creating the workspace. If I forget something, you can see it there. I think that's everything that I wanted. Okay, So we'll talk about each and every one of those in this video, but we won't cover it right now. Let's get started. So this is the artboard. This is a piece of paper. Now if you want another artboard, go over here to properties, and first let's click over here to the selection tool. So because we were in the line drawing tool, and this is going to modify based upon what tool you have selected. So let's go to the selection tool, and let's go down here to edit artboards. So now we can edit the artboard. What is an artboard? Artboard is a way of organizing your artwork. Yeah, you can draw beyond your artboard, and if you were to save it as an image file, it would include that art that's outside the artboard. But you can also, as a convenient way, you can specify to print and by segmenting by the artboard. So if you draw outside in those cases, it won't print that stuff out. So I highly recommend that you really stick to the artboard pattern because it's kind of useful, and also it's kind of a white background, so it makes it easier to draw. Okay, so let's add another artboard. You just click this little plus arrow. It's going to create a new artboard. I'm going to zoom out by holding the Alt key and then spinning the mouse wheel. And you can see that I have artboard 1 and artboard 2, and I can just keep on clicking this. Just keep on adding new artboard along. Okay, I'm now in the pan mode by holding the space key, clicking and holding, dragging it around. So now you can see I have 7 artboards. We don't need all that. You can just delete these artboards just by clicking the delete button and go back to the original. Now I'm going to hold the Alt key and zoom in, hold the space key, pan over, and you can change the properties of this this artboard. So you can see it's 8.5 inches wide and 11 inches, 8.5 inches wide, 11 inches tall. I can make this 10 inches wide, and you can see it modified. Make it 20 inches wide, and it modifies this artboard. So that's how you change the properties of the artboard. You can also change the X position using this X and Y here, or you can just kind of move it around. Now to undo, sorry, I double clicked. So to undo these changes, I just hold Control and press Z. See, it moved back to where I had it before. Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. Oh, went too far. Now, if I want to, so I did Control Z to Control Z to move back, one action that I did. But if I want to go forward, say I moved too far back, because I actually want it to be 8.5 by 11, I hold Shift, then Control, and then Z. So now I'm back to 8.5. So Control Z, holding Control and pressing Z moves back one action, and then Shift Control Z moves forward actions. And we'll cover that again, but I just, as I do things, I want to announce it. Okay, so none of this other stuff really matters, in my opinion. So I'm just going to click away. Now, to get out of the artboard editing mode, you can just click on the selection tool, or you can kind of click away, and it will leave the edit artboard mode. Okay, so now we have the artboard, and let's start drawing some lines. So I'm going to hold Alt and spin my wheel to zoom in, and let me just further press the point. It's, I made the mistake in the beginning that I just created some random document and I just started drawing. Problem with that is, I would draw this beautiful artwork, and because it's vector based, which means it's not represented in pixels or anything, I had no idea how big the thing is that I was drawing. So I would spend all this time working on this artwork, and then zoom out and realize that I drew the thing, maybe an inch wide, a little bitty thing. So, or I would draw a giant, and I really wanted to draw it small. So I, keep in mind the perspective of the drawing, and always draw in the size that you really want the artwork to be. Okay, so I spend a lot of time creating the document in the proper dimensions. Okay, so let's now, 20 minutes in, now we're ready to draw a line. Okay, so I'm going to click on this line tool, and I'm going to click with my left mouse button, and I'm going to hold the left mouse button, and then I'm just going to move that mouse to wherever I want the end point of that line. Now, some important parts about this one line that we just drew is it is a vector, and I mean it in the purest mathematical sense. This is a vector. It has an origin. It has a direction. It has this angle right here, and it has a magnitude. It is this long. Okay, you don't need to know any math to understand Adobe Illustrator, but just know that it is a vector. So now it's also a line. So what is a line in mathematical sense? It has an infinitely narrow width. So if I were to show no appearance, and this is maybe what you saw when you drew that line. You may have drawn that line. So let's delete that. Click on the line again, click and drag, and then release and say, oh, well, that's a perfect line. That's a beautiful line. Let me draw another line. And you click over here and click away and draw another line and say, oh, wait a second. Where'd my line go? I had a line. I knew I had a line. I drew the line. Where'd it go? Well, it's there. See? It's right there. You just can't see it. Well, why can't you see it? Well, the reason is because it has no width. So when you apply this color, this outline color, it's applying that appearance property to the line. The line itself has zero width. It has no pixels. So it isn't infinitely thin. It doesn't matter how far you zoom in, you're never going to see it because it doesn't have any thickness, has no color to it. There's no color up here. See, there's a diagonal red line at both of these spots. This is the fill, this is the outline. There's no color represented here. So to add a color, you move over here and you click black. Now, keep in mind that whenever you draw new objects, it takes the appearance values, every applicable or valid appearance values, and applies it to the next object that you drew. So if I were to draw a rectangle now, the rectangle is going to be a no fill, and it's going to have a black outline. Why? Because I just drew a black outline line. So when I draw the next outline, Adobe Illustrator assumes that you probably want to draw another black square or a black line or black text. So just keep that in mind. Now you can always change it afterwards, but if you kind of get frustrated, why am I always drawing lines that can't see? Well, it's because you just drew an object that didn't have an outline stroke. So, okay, anyways. So this has a 1 point thick line. Okay, you can change the thickness. So I'm making it thicker by just clicking it wider or clicking it more narrow. Again, this is an appearance applied to the line. The line itself doesn't have that thickness. It's just a property applied to the line. Okay, I won't belabor that too much. So let's go to 2. Okay, now I'm gonna create a fill and I want it to be green. You say, hey, wait, what happened? I wanted the inside to be green. Well, this is the line. It doesn't have an inside. Okay, it can have a fill, even though it's a line. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, let me just show you just real quick. If I just switch that, don't worry, I know I did that really quick. I'm going to show you how to do this in a little bit, but notice that it actually have a fill. Let me switch this to. Now notice that what it does is it just connects this endpoint with this endpoint and fills it in accordingly. Okay. Now there's some cool tricks you can do with that, but we're not going to cover that right now. Let's go back to, I'm just holding Control and pressing Z. Okay, back to no fill and a black outline. Now there's all sorts of things you can do this line. You can add an arrow point. How do I do that? I go over here to I forgot to add one thing. The appearance, very important. So I'm going to go up to Window, click Appearance. I'm going to drag that over here. I kind of like it up here. I use this all the time, so definitely have the appearance over there. So I'm going to click on this line, and then I'm going to click Appearance. And I'm going to go to Stroke. Now there's another way of getting there. You can go up, just click on Stroke, this dialog menu is the same as this one. Okay, you'll find in Adobe Illustrator there's many ways of doing the same exact thing. Some ways are convenient, some ways are not. I like going through the appearance menu because it gives me it gives me the same number of options in this dialog box, but in here I can see all the other properties. Notice that this path, this line, has a stroke property. You can make it disappear by clicking this little I button here. It has a fill. Now if I remove the fill, you can't really see it at all, but that's because, you know, it's not bent or anything. Okay, so let's click on the stroke, and we have this menu here. Now you can change the cap style and the round joint. We're going to talk about that a little bit in the future, but right now let's move down to the dash lines, because that's what most apparent. So if I click dash lines, I make a dash line just like that. Now I can change the width of that, or the length of the dash lines. I can go to type in 6. Notice how it gets more narrow. I can change the width of the gap. See, it says gap here. I can make it 2. So now it makes really narrow gaps. This gives you a lot of flexibility, but I found making more complex dash lines, like say if you want to have like a dot and then a line and then another dot, there's another way, an easier way of doing that. Just playing around with this until you get to work with this actually turns out to be more of a pain. But you can do very simple dash lines. It works really well doing that. So let's remove the dash. Now you can add arrows. So I can, now this is the beginning of the arrow. This would be the origin. And this is the end of the arrow right over here. Remember, this has a origin, a direction, and then a magnitude. Okay, so it's pointing this way. So if I add this arrow here, it's on the end because it started here and ended here. Now you can add, you know, all sorts of, you can also add something on the other end, like just move all this whole thing down. There's tons of things, you know, something like that. You know, create like an arrowhead. You can also do, let's do none, and let's go down over here to the end point. You know, maybe do an inhibitory thing or do excitatory, something like that. And you can change the size. This is the size of this arrowhead relative to the thickness of the line. So I can make this, I usually do around 60%. I mean, it looks nice here, but I usually do 60%. That tends to be the most balanced. But you're welcome to do whatever you want. Let's put it back to 100 now. This will protrude it beyond the end point of the line. This will make it meet up to the end point of the line. Okay, so that's that. Let's change to more irregular. This is a straight line. Let's make a regular line. Now the way to do that I like is well, there's two ways. One, you can use the pen tool, and the other way you can use the pencil tool. The pencil tool, you click on this. See, you have a little circle with a little pencil. Click and hold there, and you'll see the pencil tool. But let's use the pen tool for right now. Pen tool is a wonderful tool. Okay, it's not used most of the time for all its glory. What you can do is, there's several modes of using the pen tool. You can just click on the screen. Click here, click here, click here, click here, click here. And you create a, irregular line. Now, if you hold the shift key, it only creates horizontal or diagonal lines from the previous point that I just drew. So even if I'm a little far off, it's still going to only make a horizontal line, even though I clicked pretty far off. Now if I click at the end point or the beginning point, then I connect this whole, I turn it into basically a shape. It is a closed shape. If I don't do that, I can just leave it open and press the escape button. Okay, so again, I can fill this object up and it's going to connect this line here, or I can have a no fill. I can also do sorts of things with these points. Okay, let's say I want this to be curved. Okay, what I'm going to use is the direct selection tool. The direct selection tool directly selects the item that I want to select. The selection tool will select each object. If I click on this, I select the entire object. It doesn't matter how I do it. If I click and drag, I'm going to select that entire object if I touch any part of that object. Direct selection tool is a little different. If I click on it, yeah, it selects the object, but now I can select the individual point. If I click again, this point is filled and all these others are open. So I can click it and I can drag it and modify that one point. I can also, if you notice on the control toolbar, it changed. Let's click away so you can see. This is what it looked like in the beginning. But when I click the direct selection tool on that one point, you get all these other options, and that's what the control toolbar is going to do. It's going to change. Okay, well, I can make it curved. See? And now I can move these handles any way that I want. And I'm just clicking on that handle and I'm holding it down. I can extend it or I can shrink it. Now what that does is it makes this curve more dependent upon this handle than whatever's shown here. Okay? So if I move it like this, the direction of this line is more dependent upon where this line emerges from this point here. If I extend it along this way, it's going to depend more on this line here. And so you see it curves much more soon than it did before. So anyways, I can move this line. I can then move the anchor point, and I can adjust it, the angle, this way. Now I don't have to draw a jagged object and then modify it afterwards. Pen tool actually does some really cool things. So I'm going to delete this whole object, click the pen tool, I'm going to click on the screen, and now I'm going to click and hold. Notice it changes it to a curve point. Now you're going to use curve points all the time in Adobe Illustrator. Now using the pen tool this way gives you a lot of control. And if you master it, you can draw some pretty cool things. So I'm just drawing a little spiral. I'm not spending too much time on it. And then press escape. No, so press escape. And that's going to leave this object. And of course, if I see some things that, I really want to tweak, make it look a little better, I can just go in there and modify it. Now, then that's perfect. This is exactly what I wanted to do. The nice thing about the pen tool is I can spend my time on each curve, so that's its advantage. The other way of drawing a line is a pencil tool. So I can click and hold, click pencil tool. Now, and then this one I just kind of click and hold the mouse, and I just keep moving my mouse, and it just tracks that line. Okay. Now, you will find that with most tools, when you press enter, you open up options for that tool. So for instance, I clicked on this pencil tool. Now if I press the enter key, a new dialog box pops open, and I can change all sorts of properties of this pencil tool. Now it's not a permanent modification, but it's not going to change it for your other files or anything, but it changes it for this line. So I can make the line more smooth. So let's draw more smooth. So now I'm going to just kind of draw it jagged so you can see what it does. Now it turns this into a corner, and then it curves this along. So if I draw maybe a little less jagged, it does something like that, nice and smooth. Now let's go to the other extreme. Press enter. Let's go all the way to the most accurate. Okay. So now I'm going to try to draw that smooth line. And notice that it's all sorts of jagged. I mean, if I were to zoom in, it's got all sorts of points. Now I could go in here and modify each point, try to make it right. That's kind of a pain. Notice I didn't even do it right. So the best thing to do is if you want to draw a smooth line, change the smoothness. That's the quicker way of doing it. Now let's say I drew it rough, high fidelity, and I kind of want it smooth, just like this line up here. Well, there's a smoother tool, if believe it or not, and that's called the smooth tool. I can go along this line. First I need to select it. Notice I didn't do anything because I don't have it selected. Now once it's selected, move over here to the smooth tool, and I can smoothen this line. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. Okay, I'm gonna undo, Control Z. Let's get it back rough again. Another way of doing it is to click on it, then right click, and you'll see I have a whole bunch of other options. We're going to talk about these options. We're only going to select one right now, and that's going to be simplify. Now I can just move this cursor over. So here's as complicated as it was in the beginning. If I move it over here, it basically smoothens it, or draws it the way it would have been if you had chose the smooth option whenever you had the pencil tool. So that's a really handy tool. It's kind of a new feature that I love. Okay, so now I have this beautiful artwork that we have here, and I want to do nothing but to print it so that everyone can see this wonderful piece of artwork that I created. Well, to do that, I go up to File, and I go down to well, I can print it. Control P works as well. I don't have a printer connected to it, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just click on Adobe PDF. So I'm going to, so we're going to do all sorts of things to modify the properties of this printing. First, you can uncheck ignore artboards. You can see you can just print that one object that that you want to print, and you can rotate the object, do all sorts of things. Another thing that I want to show you is if you go down here to custom, you can fit to page, you can do not scale, you can also tile full pages. What this does is you can, if you create a larger document, okay, so we're going to open up a poster, and this is crazy things that were drawn. Let's delete this. Now we have this large poster, and I want to print this poster. Now obviously you could print it and send it off to a printing company and print it in a nice poster, and that's expensive, and that's certainly the way to go. But if you don't have any money, or if you're trying to print for just like a small poster session, you don't really spend any money, just go File, Print, and this actually works really good. Like, people wouldn't even know that you did it. A lot of times I've done this before, and people actually thought I printed on an actual poster. So I'm just going to click Adobe PDF. You would click your printer, whatever printer that you have, but I'm just doing Adobe PDF. Now you can go down here. First you're going to ignore artboards. Okay. Then you're going to go down here, and you're going to tile full pages. And what it's going to do is it's going to print it on different pages, and I recommend the overlap be about 1 inch. You can do a 1/2 inch, that works too. And what it does is it actually creates an overlapping page, so you can just kind of lay them on top of each other and put a piece of tape on top. I use kind of like the thick Scotch tape, packaging tape, and you do it, and you just do strips of tape, and it works amazing. And you can change the number of pages, so you can just scale it 50 by 50, and notice that it's going to scale it down. So now it's only 1, 2, 3, 4 or 4.5 pages wide. Of course, you can use scissors to cut that end off, or you can just kind of play around with it. 60, let's see what that does, and it's going to calculate the number of pages. So that's really cool. Like, it works so well to print different objects here, or to print these posters like this. So I don't know, you just play around with the scaling till you get something that that looks right. So I've already tried that. 45. Anyways, I mean, you just kind of play around with it. See, 45 looks pretty good, and it works fantastic. Just as this regular piece of paper, and just you can print your whole poster on a piece using your just desktop printer, and it does a fantastic job. Okay, enough of that. So cancel. So that's one way. No, I don't want to save this. All right, so let's go back to this edit artboard. Let's go back to 8.5 by 11. Okay. So now we're back to hold Alt key and spin. And now we're back to the individual pieces of paper that we have. Okay, you can also export this beautiful piece of artwork. So this is again my original document that we're playing around with. So you can export this original this artwork by going to File, Export, Export as. You know, you can save it as a TIFF. You know, you can save it as PNG. I recommend PNG. I like it. Does a good job without creating artifacts. Now, if you click on PNG, you can use artboard. So if you have multiple pieces of artwork, like figures of a piece of paper, you know, you can use artboards. Now, just click export, and you know, you change the resolution. If you're just kind of working with the document, you know, in PowerPoint or in you know, in Word and copy and pasting, you might want to choose like 150 ppi because it's, you know, points per square inch, so it's not too large of a, you know, the more you have, the higher, more memory it is. So if you're trying to make this, or if you're making this for actual giving it to the, you know, the journal, you know, I recommend using the high 300 ppi. If you're creating a PowerPoint slide, you have the exact pixels that you really want, because it's going to be 1080 by or 1920 by 1080. And so what I recommend in that case, save it as a screen, 72 ppi, because then it's going to create the exact resolution that you want. If you want a really high resolution, like you're afraid that maybe, you know, it's going to actually be a 4K monitor that's going to be shown, then do the high. But just keep in mind that those PowerPoint slides that you're copying and pasting it to, it's going to get really large, you know, maybe 20-30 megabytes. So, you know, just play around with that to see what you like. If you export the file and it turns out to be blurry or pixelated, then you know to increase the resolution, and you click OK, and it's going to do that. Now you can choose the background color. You can have it as transparent. Most of the time I use it as transparent. So anyways, so just cancel because I don't actually want to create that image file. But so that's one way of doing it. You can also go File and Save As, and you can save this document as a PDF. Created by Adobe, you can actually, if you save it as a PDF, you could still continue to edit it. So, and you can actually download PDF papers, like a research paper, download it and look at the file in Adobe Illustrator. Anyways, so now if you just save as Adobe Illustrator file, Untitled 2, click Save. Now you can have all these options. I just always save in the most recent version, and just click OK, and it's gonna save it as a file. Change the name up here. If you see a little star, that means it hasn't saved it. So like if I say hold Alt key and I've now modified this document, now has a star up there. What that means is I'm now working on a file that hasn't been saved. By default, Adobe Illustrator does not automatically save your files. Okay, it does that because you may make some changes that you really don't like. So it doesn't want you to contaminate your original beautiful artwork with your stuff that you're playing around with. So it doesn't automatically save. So just keep in mind that you want to keep on saving it to maintain your work. Okay, so might have been a little bit of diversion. We're drawing lines. Now we're going to draw squares, rectangles. Okay, so that's over here. This is in rectangle tool. So click and hold, and you see that you can draw rectangles, you can draw rounded rectangles, ellipse, polygons. Let's draw each one of these. So I'm going to click on a rectangle tool, click and drag, and now I've drawn a rectangle. If I want to draw a perfect square, I go back to the rectangle tool, click, cancel. So I'm going to click and hold while holding the shift key. That draws a perfect square. You'll find that the shift key, you'll be using it a lot. It makes things lines orthogonal, or it makes squares perfect shape. By the way, going back to the pencil tool before I forget, you can draw these lines like this. Now if I hold the shift key, it now draws a horizontal line. If I hold the shift key again, it's going to draw a vertical line depending on what direction I was going whenever I press the shift key. Shift key is very useful. So draw squares, circles, and everything like that. Okay, so let's click back on this rectangle. Now I can change the fill just like I was doing before, just like that. Now this square, rectangle has line stroke properties just like this line does. If I click on this, I can go over to not properties, click on appearance, and notice it has a stroke. And I can make it dashed lined. I can do all sorts of things. We can also modify the corners. What does that mean? You know what? Let's move over to this line to show what corners mean. Okay, so this line has a very sharp corner here. I click on stroke and I click on round joint. Notice it's smoothing those out. Okay, most of the time I click on this round joint to smooth them out. Okay, so this is true like if you have like a, this is a recording trace, has a lot of noise in the trace. What it will do, so if I was drawing, a very noisy trace, a spike. Okay, this is my recording. Okay, now if I were to click on stroke and do sharp, notice how it makes these very jagged lines. It actually exaggerates the noise here, so it goes way beyond the noise. So, and the sharper I make it, the more it kind of pokes out. Okay, that will happen to traces, like recording traces that you copy in. That's why when you copy it in, you're going to want to change it to smooth corners. Very important. Now the other thing is whether the end point is rounded or not. So let's zoom in here. Again, I'm holding the Alt key and then spinning my mouse wheel. Notice how it just kind of becomes flat right here. Well, I can change this to a rounded cap. It kind of extends it and makes a round. It's kind of nice, makes a soft end. You wouldn't want to do this for like scale bars, because you want to find the exact length of those scale bars. Although it's not that big of a deal, but I definitely typically use a rounded corner, and you can do the extended cap as well. But let's just do regular cap. Now this align strokes, that is important for rectangles, but not for lines. So let me click on this rectangle. Again, I can change those properties and make it a smooth end. That won't matter here because I don't have an endpoint, but I can use a rounded corner, see how it rounds it. Let's keep it jagged, or let's keep it a miter joint. That's what it says. Now, align strokes, let me zoom in here to show you what's going on. Here's the actual path of the line. Again, this stroke is applied onto that path. Now, if I click on stroke, now I can make it to where the line stroke is on the inside. So here's the path here, and the pixelated line is 2 points in. So it's 1 point, 2 point. So it's on the inside. Now if I go over the other way, it's going to start right here and go out to the end. Or symmetric is kind of the default, and it kind of aligns things towards the center. Okay, so now we can draw rectangles. Now let's draw a circle. Oh, I'm on the direct selection tool. We'll talk about what just happened in a little bit, but I'll leave you in suspense. I'm going to move to the selection tool and kind of move it over here. Let's continue to draw these shapes. Let's go over here, click and hold. Now we have the rounded rectangle, so we can just click and drag, and it creates a rounded edge. You can modify that rounded edge here. Now this rounded rectangle is kind of redundant because this rectangle that I drew just using this tool can also modify this corner. So you see, now I can make it a rounded rectangle. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to have a rounded rectangle tool when you can just round a regular rectangle. But anyways, they had it there, I think maybe because people might get lost looking for it. So let's go down here to the ellipse tool. The ellipse tool is you can draw ellipses or you can draw circles. So if I click and drag, I can draw an ellipse tool. Okay. And then when I release, then that's the ellipse. Now if I hold the shift key, I draw a perfect circle. Okay. All right. So shift key works yet again. Okay, so let's use the polygon tool. So I'm going to click and hold, and the default's I think a pentagon. Right now it's drawing a hexagon. I don't know why, but you can change the number of sides by using the up arrow or the down arrow. See, so I can make a triangle, square, pentagon, and it makes it a symmetrical line. Now, if you want the bottom edge to be flat, notice that I can change the angle anyway, but I really want the bottom to be flat. I just hold the shift key. So now the bottom edge is perfectly down to the bottom. And you can do other things. You can draw like a star, and then use the up arrows and the down arrows to change the number of vertices on the number of points on the star. And that's pretty much, I don't want to go into flare tool. That's pretty much most of the rectangles. Now line has many other things. You have a spiral tool. I don't expect that you're going to use that a lot. The rectangle tool, just click on it, click and drag, and you create a rectangle. Now you can use the up arrow to create more rows, down arrow, fewer rows, right is more columns, left, fewer columns. You can also press enter and you can change it this way. This grid that you have, you can modify the individual lines, and you just keep double clicking, and you notice that it's assembled this grid by multiple lines. Okay, and I can just modify that one line. So this is good for making like tables and charts and that sort of thing. Okay, double click away to get out of the line tool, and you can modify the size of this object. So just by going to the edge and doing this number, you can modify the size. If you hold shift key, what it's going to do is going to keep the same proportion by expanding it. Okay, or you can just use this little tool here to do wider. Same kind of thing as in PowerPoint. Okay, so that's the Alt key. Okay, so let's see. Okay, now there's guides, so that if I want to align this object with this one, I kind of move it up and see those little magenta lines. That's telling me where I can place it. Now if I place it right here, it's going to snap it to it, and this top edge is going to be aligned with this other edge. Okay, now let's talk about paths. Okay, now you can join paths together. So let me do a pencil. Okay, and let's actually delete that. I'm gonna draw smoother. I tend to like it about right there. Okay, so I want to join these paths. So I'm gonna to do it, I want to click on. Well, really, you can just click on the whole object and hold Control and press J, and it's going to combine the endpoints together. Okay. Another way of doing it is to use the direct selection tool. Click on that endpoint, hold Shift, click on this endpoint. That selects both of those endpoints. Hold Control and press J. That's going to connect those two endpoints. And we just use the Shift key. Shift key is an important key. So I can click on this object. If I hold Shift and then click on this object, I've then selected both of those objects. Another way of doing it is to hold the mouse button and select, and see I have now kind of like a marquee select, and I release, and now I select both those objects. If I put that over any part of that object, it will select the entire object. You can also select points this way. So if I go to the direct selection tool, click and hold, I've selected this point and this point, but I haven't selected any other points of the anchor. And so now I can kind of drag it along and move this curve along because I've selected both of those anchor points. Same thing with objects. If I go over to the selection tool, select these 3 objects and move it around, I'm moving all 3 of those objects together. Okay, so let's talk about, there's all sorts of things you can do in combining objects. So for instance, I can move this object over here, these 2 overlapping objects, and I can use this little shape builder tool. What it's going to do is, let me select both of these objects. In order to use the shape blender tool, you have to have selected all the objects that you want to mess with. Okay, what is a shape builder tool? What I notice that whenever I've selected both those objects, but whenever I click on this shape builder tool, it kind of highlights specific portions of these 2 objects. These are enclosed portions of the object. So, and it doesn't have to have a fill for it to be enclosed. Notice that this doesn't have a fill, and it's kind of showing it in a whole bunch of dots. So what I can do is I can actually combine these objects. If I click and drag, I've created a single object from the 2. Let me Control Z to show you what's happening. Now what I could have kind of dragged along all these objects, and it will copy the appearance. And if I, I can change the color to well, I need to select the object again and change it to, green or something like that. Another way of doing that is using the Pathfinder tool. So I can go over here, as I've selected both of these objects, I can go over here to the Pathfinder tool and click Unite. Okay, Unite is going to combine all the objects regardless of the fill. Now, let's do this again to kind of show you what happened here. So if I click on this and I give it a fill, let's give it a different color, that's fine. Highlight both these objects and then click Merge. It's going to merge what it can, but these are different appearance values. Okay, so let's click on this. Use the eyedropper tool to get the same appearance as this other object. So I'm going to type eye. That gives me this little eyedropper. Now, to keep in mind, I've selected this object. I want to change this object to the same appearance as this green object. So I click eye, and then I click on it. And it's going to suck up that color, all the valid appearance properties, and apply it to this other rectangle. Okay, so now let's try this again. I'm going to highlight both these objects and I'm going to click Merge. See what has happened now? Now it has combined these 2 objects because they have the same appearance value. Okay, and it'll also work with this this other one, Unite. It combines it, but it's just the Unite disregards the fill. So if I change this back to like a white, highlight both these objects and click Unite, it combines all of them. Right. Now another thing I can do is I can do Divide. Boom. What the Divide does is it cuts, I'm going to ungroup this object. So I'm going to right click Ungroup. Now I can pull this object apart. So what it did is it is separated into separate objects. The Pathfinder is really cool. It gets kind of difficult to remember what does what. Just Divide will kind of chop everything up based upon the paths, and the Merge, or really the Unite, is going to combine all those objects. See, if I were to bring it back here, let's see if this will work. I actually don't know if this will work. Let's see if I can unite this back again. See, it combined all those objects. And the reason why it combined is because I made sure that when I dragged it, it snapped to that original object. Okay. All right. Okay, so we've covered a lot of material here. Let's work with the erasing tool. And then I think the rest of the stuff I'll cover in a new video. So we have, there's a couple ways of getting rid of points. One way is use the direction. So let's say I want to chop this off right about here. So I'm going to click on the direct selection tool, kind of click and drag, do that sort of number, and click delete. And that's one way, but notice it didn't do it perfect. So that's not wonderful. Another way of doing it is use the erasing tool. So I click on the erasing tool, and I click and drag, and just kind of do this number, and there. Notice how it's a little more accurate to where I ended at the point. Okay, now you say, well, I have a vertical line. How do I get my eraser to do that? Well, I clicked on the eraser tool, press enter, and I get all sorts of properties, just like many of the other tools in here. I can modify how round the eraser is, and I can change the angle of the eraser. It's really handy. You know, if you want to kind of trim all the traces down to the same position, then you can modify these things, and you can change the size, and that should show you how. That'll change how big that eraser is. Just click OK. Alright, so that's one way of doing it. Another way is clipping mask. Now, clipping mask is one of those things I think a lot of people are afraid to use because they don't understand it. I was there for the longest time. I didn't use clipping mask, and I was irritated that a piece of artwork would have a clipping mask. I've grown to appreciate clipping mask for their wonderful utility. The reason why is, let's take a look at this line here. Okay, let's position these a little more tightly so that we can see what's going on here. Okay, now I'm going to use the eraser tool like I just told y'all, and I'm going to click on the eraser tool, and I'm going to move it over here, and then so that's about where I want it, and I'm going to release. Now look what happened. Okay, I didn't move my eraser, but the lines didn't, whenever I erased it, didn't quite meet up with the eraser. And it might sound like a nitpicking thing, but whenever you're drawing a complicated piece of artwork, the fact that it jumped a little bit can be a problem. Okay, so that's where a clipping mask comes in handy. So to do a clipping mask, draw a rectangle, draw it about the size that you want it. You know, and you can kind of tweak it, say, oh, I know I really want it about this big. And it needs to be over, so maybe right click, click arrange, bring to front, and it needs to be in front. Highlight all the objects that you want to be included. Right click on this path and go make clipping path. Make clipping mask. Now this will chop it exactly right along that line. Okay, so, and then you can modify this clipping mask by double clicking on it. Click again. Now I can just modify it as much as I want. So this is really cool. I mean, the clipping mask is handy, I promise you. Don't be afraid to use it. Okay, so I think that's you know, we covered a lot of material today. So we've covered how to select objects, how to create new documents, how to print those documents, how to save it, export it in different figures. I compared and contrasted, raster versus vector editing, and how to create artboards. How do you change the workspace? And we've drawn rectangles and stars and pentagons. So I hope this kind of gets you started on drawing things in Adobe Illustrator. The next video is going to take it to the next level, how to align objects. I definitely recommend not just stopping here, but moving to the next video, because you're really going to learn a lot of things that I didn't cover here. But this will get you started.